Greetings! Welcome to the SciFi Pubcast, the podcast that tries to be a pub and perhaps someday a pub that tries to be a podcast. And as always, we are a community bar. So if you're looking to come visit our bar, we are always looking for customers. So even check out podcasting first time. If you have something passionate to say, please contact this bar. Contact us because we want to engage in conversation. My name is Joel. I'm the so-called bar owner of the SciFi Pubcast. I'm looking around. We have a few customers in today, which is great to see. If you're not watching the YouTube, which we're going to be uploading, because some of the video of us, interesting to say the least. Right now, I'm seeing.
This is why I don't look at the video.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I see Carrie Simpson. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good.
We also have Derek Beebe. Derek.
Howdy ho.
And good. And the reason why I'm saying that, because if for all our listeners, Derek is in his condo. He's wearing a Boba Fett helmet, so you can't see his face, which is actually quite good. And he's wearing.
No, we can barely hear him too, which is even better.
Yeah, and he's wearing a T-shirt, a Hobbit shirt. I hope it doesn't come up short, but yeah, the Hobbit. There you go.
I'm a firm believer in mixed messages.
Sure you are. Yes. What else? Oh, and we also have another one. We have a special staff member back. He's paying us a visit. He's a very busy man, but we love him when he drops by. It's Dr. Randal Graham. Hi, Randal.
Afternoon, everybody.
Luckily, Randal's not on video because he's the smart one. So, so there's
that. What are you trying to say, Joel?
Hey,
you mean I'm not here for my looks?
Yeah. Well, you have to grow a beard, like some facial hair, like I'm doing right now. So, then we can be twins. So, with me, I have a Yoda T-shirt on just because, Yoda. I don't know why his species has kind of been around of late, and I'm just trying to be with the times.
And as always, no pants.
Yeah, no pants. But I do have this big giant broadsword in my hand.
Okay. Please.
So yeah, this giant broadsword from actually the Chronicles of Narnia. It's you think it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. It's related, right? Sure. There you go. Props.
Well, Tolkien and Lewis were colleagues, I think.
Yeah, they were colleagues and friends and drinking buddies.
Yeah.
And they smoke a lot of tobacco from like pipes.
So the cross pollination is appropriate.
Absolutely. So before we get to our topic, I just want to run through some basic banter and some housekeeping. Let's start with the most important thing. Carrie, how's your day been? How's your day been?
Well, the drugs have kicked in, so my headache's gone.
Excellent.
But otherwise, it's good. I haven't been out of the house lately because head drugs. Yeah. The day's improving though.
Yeah. How's the brush fires down your way down in Southern California? Is that affecting you?
Well, except for the smoke, that's mostly not affecting me. And most of them, I think, are out now. They haven't been. I haven't heard of any new ones cropping up, and we had some rain on Wednesday, so hopefully that keeps the fires away.
My
for
God,
a little while.
Rain in California. Who'd have thought?
I know it's a very, very strange concept. It freaks everyone out.
Yeah. We have Derek. Derek, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to Thursday, which is my Christmas of the year, Black Thursday, when I get all my shopping done.
Right. At least you're shopping. You're not actually not shopping, so there's that. Yeah.
Well, I participate in Buy Nothing Day next Friday. So.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm just looking at Derek and his Boba Fett helmet. My God, man, are you okay in there? You want us to send help?
I thought this was a Daft Punk helmet.
That could be it too, but no, not really. Yeah, it looks like
Speaking
there's some
of visual gags, I have a question for Carrie. What's with the home improvement mug?
Oh, my dad got this while he was working on not home improvement. He was working on the Disney lot, mostly because I drink it from it because of the other side of the mug, which says "You work, I'll supervise."
Yeah. Maybe you are the smart one after all. Okay. Derek, how is our kitchen doing?
pretty good. I have no gags. I'm just serving lembas because I always loved the idea of this elven bread that tasted delicious, and it was in this tiny little packet, but it filled you up the entire day. I always thought that was a really cool idea.
Yeah, cool. I like that. Yeah. Something we actually would put on as an appetizer or something like that.
Yeah.
Be good. And Randal, we haven't heard from you in a couple of weeks. What's new in your world?
Well, we're a bit busy. It's exam season, and for the last couple of weeks I've been away on conference talks. But my most recent conference talk, I actually wasn't the one doing the talking. I was just a guest at someone else's lecture, and I don't know if you saw on the social media channels, it was about law and sport, and so we were all taking pictures with the NBA championship trophy, and we all got to try on NBA championship rings. And a student called me aside in the hallway the other day, who I barely know. He's a first-year student, really cute little kid. And he said, Professor Graham, I hate to ask you a personal question, but do you own an NBA championship ring? And his eyes grew all wide.
God.
And I realized in that moment that no matter what I do as an academic, none of it will ever be as impressive as having for 5 seconds an NBA championship ring. Which I found vaguely depressing.
That's how the ball bounces, man. Okay.
Nice. Apart from that, it's just exam season, so I'm taking lots of calls and emails from students who are freaking out because, as Joel can attest, in law school, exams are worth 100% of your final grade. So it's terrifying.
Yeah.
That's a joke, right?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it depends on the professor, but obviously Randall does his classes one way. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
most of us do 100% final exams. We have to offer alternative options for students, but almost all students pick the 100% final.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Does that mean you don't have homework through the year?
Yeah, you got nothing. You can just show up and write the exam if that's your thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
So a telepath would have a real advantage there. They just have to get a seat close to you.
Yeah, well, you're assuming I know the answers to my own exams.
Oh dear
Wait,
God.
you don't?
Of course
Who
I
writes
do.
your exams, Randall?
I'm just being silly.
Oh wait. If you're a lawyer, basically the answer is always it depends. So, yeah.
Yeah, who's paying me?
Exactly. Well, with my update, I'm involved with another little podcast called Mando Night Football, which I'm doing with Ernie Garcia and Mike Templeton and Chris McGuffin. Remember Chris McGuffin? We're covering all the new Star Wars TV shows on Disney Plus. So right now it's just a Mandalorian. So yeah, I really like your helmet. Okay, Derek, it's in right now. So we actually recorded an episode this morning. So it's keeping me busy. Also, I just finished reading the new expense novella Oberon by James S.A. Corey. That's available. So talking about Chris McGuffin and the Crash Couch podcast. So I can't wait till Expanse season 4 starts in December.
Yeah, that's actually on my list. But right now, I'm the DC Universe app is now finally available on the Kindle Fire. So I've been reading through Crisis on Infinite Earths in preparation for the crossover in 2 weeks.
Nice.
I should read that again.
And also, Watchmen is available on Prime Reading, so I'm finally reading that so that I can understand the Watchmen series a bit more better.
Yeah, I haven't seen Watchmen, the TV series, because I don't get Crave TV in Canada or HBO. But someday, yeah, that's on my list. Someday.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it to finish, and then I'll get HBO for a single month and just watch it all at once. But I'm looking forward to it because Watchmen is one of my favorite comics of all time.
Mm-hmm.
All of my media time lately has been devoted to rewatching various Star Trek series because I'm not that I'm counting down or anything, but today is 99 days until the Star Trek cruise.
and also Picard is coming soon.
So exciting.
Yay.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. Housekeeping. Just to let you know, as you probably could tell by the jokes we're making, we're posting some of these episodes up on YouTube because I find that people put YouTube on in the background and then they go around and they do housework and chores. So it's just another way to get our content and to see that we actually are real people. Well, we're not sure about Derek, but he looks like a real person, but you know what I'm talking about. Also, Discord server. Yes, Discord, which is an online text app you use to interact like chat rooms. Sometimes it's hopping, sometimes it's not. We're just trying to push it because we're trying to build our community. and we want more voices out there. The more voices, the better. So, and there's other podcasts out there with great Discord channels as well. I encourage everyone to take part in everywhere, every Discord server. Discord servers for everyone. Our beer recommendation. Well, my local sports bar, which I go to frequently in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, is a St. Louis Bar and Grill on Elgin Street. And they're doing a bunch of winter cocktails. One is called Cranberry Margarita. I'm going to post some pictures of it on our social media. But think of rosemary and a bunch of cranberries in a margarita glass with a soda rim with a lime. It's absolutely delicious. To make you thirsty, on the menu it says, a seasonal take on the traditional margarita, complete with tequila, triple sec, and cranberry juice, shaken and garnished with a lime. God, I think I'm going to have one once I finish recording this podcast. Yes, I'm going to walk 2 blocks to actually have a drink. Shocking. And now for the main event. Yes, we're talking Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings. Which creation has made the greater cultural impact? There are many great storytelling franchises out there. Star Wars and Lord of the Rings are just 2 of the great ones. As an interesting thought experiment, we are asking ourselves which one has made a greater cultural impact, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. But this isn't a debate. It's a conversation. There's no winners or losers here. We're just having some fun, and we're not going to draw any conclusions. We're just going to go for it, because I think both are interesting in their own way. So, yes.
Good luck with that, Joel.
Yeah. First, I just want to, off the bat, I just want to say, Derek, this is your idea.
Yes.
You know, I hate you. So, I fell down this rabbit hole last week trying to do show notes, and the show notes is like 18 pages now, and no one in their right mind would go through and read all the articles or the YouTube videos I posted. It's so big, but, it's out there. There's a lot of materials out there, especially on Lord of the Rings and its influence on literature and the fantasy genre.
Yeah, I read a lot of articles myself just now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
I have to read them immediately beforehand because I got a memory like a goldfish.
Oh, lovely. Hey, let me ask you, talking about pop culture stuff, let's ask our esteemed colleague here, Dr. Randal Graham, who's, of course, the author of Before Life.
Drink.
Okay. So, Randal, what has made more of an impact on you in terms of being a novelist? Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
It's, of course, being the kind of guy I am, I'm going to give you a really long answer to that, because it's a really, really tough question. You picked 2 interesting inspirations or sources of inspiration when it comes to me specifically, because I think you may recall Star Wars is the first movie I ever saw in my life. I was 6 years old when it came out, and I hadn't been to the cinema before, and my dad took me to go see it. And I think I've told you the story before. When we were sitting waiting for the movie to start, it was one of those old style theaters with the curtains that close up front. And I leaned over to my dad and I asked him if the actors were out behind that curtain getting dressed and getting ready to perform. And my dad explained to me, no, it's like a big TV show. And I said, well, then why aren't we watching it at home? I mean, like, why are we in the theater for that? I didn't understand what a movie was. And so hitting me early, right? Star Wars had this immediate massive impact on my psyche because it taught me what a movie was. So that's huge. The first time I really got into literature, though, was reading Lord of the Rings. I met a bunch of guys when I was in elementary school who were really into Dungeons and Dragons. And they wanted to invite me to start playing. And they said, if you want to play, you should read The Hobbit. And instead of The Hobbit, I went to Lord of the Rings first because my mom and dad got me a copy, and I read it, and I loved it, and then I read it again, and I loved it more. And so these 2 things have been with me, both from the time that I was a very, very, very young kid. And it's funny when you talked about both of them being of cultural importance in different ways, because to me, they're of cultural importance in almost precisely the same way. I don't really look at Star Wars as science fiction. It's fantasy. I look at it as a direct descendant of Lord of the Rings. And it's like, for me, it's like saying what had a greater cultural impact, the word the or the letter E, right? Like you need the letter E to make the word the. For me, so much of what Tolkien did bleeds into what Star Wars did. The question of whether Star Wars then had greater scope and reach. I think that depends on what you're using to measure cultural impact. And I'm terrified of what we might use to measure cultural impact, because on some metrics, Kylie Jenner beats both of them. I'd like to think that Tolkien carved out a massive genre, and Star Wars helped fill it up. And they've both brought joy to countless numbers of people, and the overlap is so great that it's really, for me, difficult to separate out the two.
I was very tempted to bring Star Trek into this business, but having 3 major franchises versus 2 major franchises, I just couldn't do the time and the research in it.
Well, that was my first fear, was that what if you said what's bigger, Star Trek or Star Wars? Because they're contemporaries, right? Like, it's not
Absolutely.
like one really built on the other in the same sequential way. But with Lord of the Rings, and it's interesting thinking about Lord of the Rings' cultural impact, because it had this massive cultural impact. It turned out, RPGs in a huge way, role-playing games are direct descendants of Tolkien's work. But then it sort of waned a little bit at the time that Star Wars was ascending. And then suddenly Peter Jackson gets a hold of the franchise, and it starts ascending again. At the same time, we have the resurgence of Star Wars. So at any individual moment, I think you might be able to say this one is currently having a bigger cultural impact than the other. But I suspect that I will spend most of this podcast running around in circles trying to figure out what I think in response to this question.
I love it. Just to let you guys know, I first read The Hobbit when I was 9 years old. I remember that. It made a huge impact. And I read The Lord of the Rings right after. And for my teen years and my early 20s, I reread the Lord of the Rings series once every 2 years, religiously. It was kind of like my religion. But I also was young enough to go see Star Wars for the first time when it was out, in the movie theater. I don't remember seeing The New Hope. I was too young. But I do remember seeing Empire, because I was at a drive-in, apparently. And I kind of remember that. I was really young. So, it's amazing the influence. So I love both of these genres or these franchises. Carrie, what do you think? You look like you have some things to say.
Well, okay. So this is the part of the show where I admit that I didn't actually get into Lord of the Rings until maybe 10, 15 years ago. When did the first movie come out?
2001, December.
Okay, so it was just before that. I like Randall. Star Wars is the first movie I can remember seeing. Not in the theater. I was 3 years old and in the living room of a family friend, and that Star Vader. Like as soon as Vader walked on the screen, I was hooked. I have always been more of a sci-fi nerd than a fantasy nerd. Most of my fantasy novel reading has been as a result of my best friend going, "Here, you need to read this," which is how I read Dragonlance and a lot of Mercedes Lackey and Catherine Kurtz and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, as far as impact on me personally, Star Wars has had the bigger impact on me, but I can see where Lord of the Rings has influenced a lot of the stuff that I personally like dealing with. So yeah, I think like Randall, I'm going to be chasing my tail a bit on this.
I love it, because me too. Okay, Derek, it's time, man. This is your 2 cents worth. Go for it, my friend.
Well, obviously Star Wars is always my first love, and it always will be. But Lord of the Rings is also a very, very close number 2 for me. And in terms of, obviously the book I've read the most in my life over and over again is Lord of the Rings. And I love sci-fi and fantasy. While I generally prefer sci-fi, I actually end up writing more fantasy than sci-fi, and everything that I have published is fantasy except for the one Sherlock short story. So Lord of the Rings is hugely important to me, and I didn't even think about this until Randall was talking about it, but I think Lord of the Rings is what got me into reading. I'm trying to remember now. I think that might have been it. I think I was in middle school, and I remember that my dad had an old copy sitting in the garage, and it was one of the old 60s paperback versions, and it was kind of moldy and worn because it had been sitting out in the garage in Florida summers. But yeah, I think that might have been the book that got me into reading. And I mean, so for my own personal self, they're very nearly equal. I prefer Star Wars, but Lord of the Rings was almost as influential for me. And in terms of cultural impact, it's hard to say. I mean, like, you might look at it in the modern day and say Star Wars is bigger, but I mean, Lord of the Rings redefined so much of our popular culture for this century, and those books are the best-selling novel of the century. They've been voted the best novel of the century. They sold 150 million copies. They basically created the fantasy genre as we know it. They popularized fantasy and science fiction genres, which were a very, very small niche market before the 50s and the 60s. They created the mass market paperback market, which again was not a very popular thing before they started making Lord of the Rings paperback books. And you can't get to Star Wars without Lord of the Rings. George Lucas has said that Lord of the Rings was a huge influence on him. Obviously, he was basically doing Flash Gordon, but he also said that Lord of the Rings was a huge influence as well. So it's almost apples and oranges to say which one is bigger. They're both substantial parts of our culture. You could also argue that Lord of the Rings has more of an international impact because Star Wars is a very American and English phenomenon. It's not as popular in other countries. So internationally, you could definitely argue for Lord of the Rings, but they're both huge in different ways.
Plus, Lord of the Rings gave us 3 amazing Led Zeppelin songs, including "Stairway to Heaven" and "Misty Mountain." So.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the music that's been influenced by Lord of the Rings, but I've read that a lot of metal stuff in the 70s. Oh yeah, and also it was a huge proponent in the creation of the hippie movement and the environmental movement. Frodo was latched onto, and the books in general, as kind of an emblem of environmentalism and, you know, free love and anti-government, anti-war, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, the ring.
I never heard before now that things said Gandalf for president, but I definitely heard of Frodo lives being graffitied everywhere in the 60s.
Yeah, the ring was a metaphor for nuclear war and nuclear weapons.
Yep.
So.
I once based an evidence exam in law school on Lord of the Rings. It was about a ring from Middle-earth jewelers stolen by a little guy named Frodo from a jeweler named Smeagol who worked at the in the jewelry store. And I hope my students understood where the references were coming from. If they didn't, I'm very sad indeed. And it must have, Graham is on drugs or something, making up these weird names. But I make my own fun. But I see your Led Zeppelin reference, and I raise you John Williams.
Oh, okay, great. Ooh. Oh. Right, so John Williams, yes, a major composer for the last 45 years. He's influenced almost every composer there is in Hollywood. Yeah, that's interesting. So what's more important, soundtracks or rock bands? The whole
Yes.
Yeah. What's the metric we're using? That's the thing. This is the problem with this question, is that it really depends on the metrics. Yeah.
If you walked around surveying people around the world, I was surprised by what Derek said about Star Wars being a North American phenomenon, because I sort of assume if you went anywhere in Japan and said to someone, have you seen Star Wars or have you read Lord of the Rings? I think most people would answer yes to question 1, and I have no idea how many would answer yes to question 2. But I don't know about Europe. I don't know about Africa and the reach of either of those franchises.
Yeah,
well, I know there was a big news story when Force Awakens came out in 2015 that Star Wars was basically an unknown franchise in China, and it didn't do a lot of money there, and they were trying to release the old movies in theaters in advance of TFA because Chinese audiences just flat out didn't know what Star Wars was, because it was, it wasn't released back in the day because of the communist censorship. So
Do you
know
want to
definitely
popularize
in
something
China,
that features a
it's
rebellion?
Basically zero.
Yeah, do you want to popularize something that features a rebellion?
Yeah, which is why the Joker isn't gonna get released in China either.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just, it's just these Ewoks. I can't trust these Ewoks. Yeah. And it's also.
Hey, that's your security
I know.
staff you're talking about there.
Yeah, I pay them very well. Okay, so yeah, I think in Europe, I think traditionally Lord of the Rings probably was more popular because there's a sense of Star Wars being an American franchise. But then again, I'm sure if you go to the most remote village on the face of the planet, like in the middle of Greenland or in the middle of the Andes, and you show the local a picture of Darth Vader or a lightsaber or a TIE fighter, they will say, I know that. Just where's that from again? So it's brand recognition. I don't know.
And yet, on the other hand,
I don't know that
Star Wars is a movie, it's a visual medium, whereas Lord of the Rings was just a book series for most of its existence.
Yeah. If you look at the profit, and I'm relying on Wikipedia, believe it or not, because it's easy and convenient. So Lord of the Rings has made $19.9 billion over its history, since 1937 when The Hobbit was published. Star Wars, on the other hand, has made $68 billion since the first movie came out in 1977. So in terms of straight, how much money did these things make? Well, it's going to go towards Star Wars.
That's because of the merchandising.
Merchandise.
Where the real money from the movie is made.
Thank you, Yogurt.
Yeah. But believe it or not, Star Wars is only fifth on the list. There's 4 other franchises that's made more money, believe it or not, if you can trust the Wikipedia article that says list of highest grossing media franchises. Number 1 is Pokemon. Number 2 is Hello Kitty.
Really?
So you have 2 video games.
I can believe that.
And cartoons. Number 3 is Winnie the Pooh. And the 4th one is Mickey Mouse and Friends.
Yeah.
So
if we want to
Pooh sells better than Mickey Mouse?
Yeah, Mickey Mouse and Friends. Yeah. Well, this is.
If we want to confuse matters, though, I will throw into question whether we can use this as a cultural metric. William Shakespeare's brand is estimated to be worth $600 million.
True. Interesting.
So way below, probably Kim Kardashian.
But it's also public domain now, so you can do Shakespeare and not have to pay money for it.
Thank God, because I quote him like crazy in Afterlife Crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait until he gets CGI into a movie. So, playing himself. Yeah. There's that. So
another metric we can throw around is that Lord of the Rings is the 3rd best-selling novel in history, topped only by Don Quixote and A Tale of Two Cities. But to be fair, they have a few centuries of a head start on them.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, Before Life's only been out since 2017.
Drink! Drink! Oh, God, I love that. So, yeah, we have books, and there's Star Wars books out there as well, but they're in aid of the films, I would say. There's movies. I think Star Wars has done a much better job than movies in Lord of the Rings because they've done more movies, but still, I like Lord of the Rings movies. There's also video games. So any fantasy video game out there can, owes something to the Lord of the Rings. Whereas I don't think every science fiction game out there owes something to Star Wars.
Well, here's another test, another metric. You're out on a first date, and the person hasn't heard of only one of these franchises. Which one would be more disappointing?
Either one, I would walk right out.
I say Star Wars.
I guess that depends. I have run kids classes where I've quoted Obi-Wan Kenobi and had the kids look at me weird. So, yeah, that happens.
So you don't date the little kids.
Well, little kids. But no, seriously though, like I quote Star Wars at work all the time, and only maybe 3 people know what I'm saying. it's the same with Lord of the Rings. So it depends on the crowd you're interacting with.
I think Star Wars is a generational thing, and so it's over 3 generations now, thereabouts. And if you haven't heard of Star Wars, where have you been? You're probably a plant from some foreign intelligence agency, really. So no, I'm not going to date the person. So yeah, there's that.
All other factors being equal.
Yeah, exactly. What has made the more generational impact then? Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
Well, if Lord of the Rings influenced George Lucas to make Star Wars, then I would say Lord of the Rings.
Right.
It's a bit like saying who's more important for physics, Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you could throw Neil deGrasse Tyson in there because he's the one who's explaining it to everyone, to the common person, in a way. But I think he would probably say one of the two of them.
Right.
The other thing that I would point out is that up until 20 years ago, Lord of the Rings was only a book series. So, the fact that it had the influence that it did, despite being a book and not having any kind of visual medium, makes it all the more impressive that it had this kind of influence on people.
Untrue. There is an animated version.
Yeah, I know, but it's not like
and
that
the
was
Hobbit.
a huge bestseller.
Yeah.
There's also the Leonard Nimoy song from the Muppet Show.
Oh yeah.
Go Bilbo.
Yes.
That debuted on the Muppet Show?
I believe. Well, it might have been on one of Nimoy's albums, but yeah, he sung it on the Muppet Show.
Oh,
I did not know that. I've seen that on YouTube a number of times, but I had no idea it had a Muppet connection. And so
not everything associated with the Muppets has a rainbow connection. So
nice. Am I being fair when I attribute the existence of D&D to Lord of the Rings? Because that's been a huge part. Well, it's not anymore, but it was a huge part of my life, and it seemed pervasive when I was a kid. And like elves, hobbits, orcs, all that stuff was core to Dungeons and Dragons.
I did read just now that Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons, was more into Conan the Barbarian than he was Lord of the Rings, but everyone else involved in the creation of it were huge Lord of the Rings fans, and they insisted on throwing in as much Tolkien stuff as possible. So while the head honcho wasn't so much into Lord of the Rings, everyone around him was. So
yeah, and they also ran into trademark and copyright issues with things like Ants versus Trent, right? So they had to change some names. They could halfling instead of hobbit.
And was orc an invention of Tolkien?
I believe it was, yes.
I believe so, yeah. It was his version of a goblin.
Because they do have orcs and half-orcs in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lineage there. I think D&D traded a lot on the currency of the Lord of the Rings and the popularity of it.
And let's not forget Mork from Orc.
Good.
And elves.
Wrong kind of work.
The Tolkien elf was a huge departure from what we thought of elves as before. Santa's little helpers, or the guys from Keebler.
Yeah. Or the Icelandic elves who basically live under the highways in Iceland or caves. So yeah. So to go back to the whole generational thing, like what influenced Tolkien? Norse mythology, of course, stories, languages. The whole thing about languages is amazing because the Lord of the Rings, and with Tolkien, he invented his own languages. Like, who does that? It's amazing when you think about it. I'm just thinking about like language issues. New vocabulary, hobbits, orcs, poetry. Songs. 9 rings to bind them all, and what was 9 rings to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them.
Bind them.
Yeah. Whereas we have Star Wars, and if anyone is into Star Wars, they can say a lot of different lines out there, and there's a pop culture reference. Even lines that
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
I can actually probably rhyme off more lines from Star Wars than I can from Lord of the Rings, notwithstanding the fact that one is in text and I look at it, frequently.
Right. Yeah. But even stuff that's miscited, like Luke, I am your father, which of course was never said in Empire Strikes Back. It's more like I am your father. No, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah.
I have a really bad feeling about this.
I love that one.
Yes.
Yes. So
yeah, it is funny to think about how they each had their own massive impact on culture in different ways. Like, as I said, Lord of the Rings basically created the modern fantasy genre. It created the mass market paperback franchise. It had a huge hand in environmentalism and hippies. Whereas you look at Star Wars, it didn't create the modern day blockbuster. That's more Jaws territory, but it did, further that on. And I would say perhaps the biggest influence Star Wars had was in merchandising, because before Star Wars, they didn't really do movie tie-ins or action figures for movies or things like that. And Lucas made a mint on that and started an entire trend that didn't really exist before that, which is why Fox was willing to give him the merchandising rights for next to nothing and the sequel rights, because they thought this movie's going to bomb. Nobody's going to buy toys about this. But he proved them wrong on that one.
Yeah, but the Lord of the Rings gave us maps. Cool maps of Middle Earth.
Maps did not exist before Lord of the Rings. Little known fact.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing.
And another counter argument I would say to the influence of Star Wars is that while Star Wars itself was hugely successful, you didn't really see a large trend of Star Wars style science fiction movies afterwards that were successful. There were certainly some cheap knockoffs, but what other hugely successful space opera movie series was there in the 80s or the 90s?
Star Trek, of course.
Star Trek existed
sci-fi,
prior to that, and it never made a lot of money. The movies did well, but not great.
And Star Trek is harder sci-fi than Star Wars, which is more fantasy.
Yeah.
Than sci-fi.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Were there any successful sci-fi, space opera, fantasy movies?
Well, the Alien franchise straddles the line between fantasy and sci-fi, I think.
Okay. Yeah. And fantasy and horror and sci-fi and horror. Yeah.
I don't really consider Alien.
By the way, I was wrong. Nimoy did not perform the Hobbit song on the Muppet Show. I've been trying to look it up since I said that.
Well, you've been taking drugs today, so that's
yeah, I've been taking drugs today.
Yeah. Well, we have like parodies. We have Spaceballs. Is there a parody of Lord of the Rings? I think there was.
It was called Lord of the Rings.
Oh, right, the book.
Pretty popular paperback.
Yeah, I read that back in the day.
There's also Fellowship, the musical parody of the Fellowship of the Rings, which a friend of mine gave me the soundtrack for years ago, and I still haven't finished it. I'm a very bad friend.
I read Lord of the Rings in grade 8, and the only thing I can remember from it, I didn't particularly like it, I remember that, but I remember the Tom Bombadil character was Tim Benzedrine, and he did a little rhyme, and it was, I sit on the floor and pick my nose and think of dirty things, and that's all I can remember. I don't know why that made an impact, but it did.
Amazing. Let's see, fans. There's fans in both communities, but I dare say Star Wars fans are probably more numerous and more widespread between podcasters and cosplayers and web people and tattoo artists and set designers and everyone in the fan community. Whereas I think Lord of the Rings, I can think of maybe Comic-Cons. People dress up as orcs. That was in the Paul movie by Simon Pegg, which I really love. Renaissance fairs, that type of stuff. What do you guys think?
There's also the entire country of New Zealand as well.
Oh, of course, because that goes without saying.
That didn't exist before Lord of the Rings.
Yes, little known fact, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and tourism is huge. So you mentioned New Zealand. Yeah, you can go visit Hobbiton as a tourist attraction. That's on my bucket list. So, actually Google Hobbiton, and they give tours of the place. And
the economic impact that those movies had on the country of New Zealand was incredible. I mean, I when I think of Lord of the Rings, usually talk about the books as they existed before the movies. But yeah, the movies were also a huge impact and influence on the world as well.
Did you see the air safety video by Air New Zealand from a few years ago?
Yeah.
It was on YouTube. It's on YouTube, and it's amazing because they did all the safety stuff for the flight using the Lord of the Rings references, and just Google that. It's amazing. Whereas with tourism and Star Wars, well, I know personally a few fans who they go to all the film sites, and to visit. So they've been to Ireland, they've been to Tunisia. It's hardcore. Some of them. There's celebrations, Star Wars celebrations. I think there's been 12 or 13 of them. I've been to 8 myself. Then there's going back to merchandise. You can buy Star Wars luggage that's been around for 10 years by American Tourister. Cool. Oh, you have jet planes decked out in Star Wars decals by ANA, the Japanese airline.
United is doing it too.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They also did that for Lord of the Rings. I remember there were smog planes.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, with the Hobbit movies, they had smog painted on the plane so that the plane looked like it was smog flying through the sky.
It's true. Lord of the Rings invented smog. LA would not exist without Lord of the Rings.
Hey! Our smog is not nearly as bad as it used to be.
Oh, God.
Of course,
I've
there's
been
no
thinking
fires
back-
right now, so even the smoke is gone.
I've been thinking back to Joel's generational question, and let's assume that humanity survives the next few years. I think we'd probably all say 400 years from now, if humans exist, literature will still make reference to Shakespeare. I don't feel confident predicting which of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings would disappear first, if at all. I think they will both echo down through the ages.
Yeah, I think so. I think
You're right.
Yeah. Well, you have Star Wars being supported heavily as a franchise by Disney and the Disney parks with Galaxy Edge. I don't think Disney is in the business of closing parks down, but who knows what the future may bring.
Baby Yoda may just blow up so much that we're talking about that for the next 4,000 years.
Yes, yeah. He becomes his own religious figure of some type, right? Okay.
I do not object.
Oh, God.
I really can't see Lord of the Rings ever going away because a famous book never disappears. I mean, everybody knows who Don Quixote is, even though that book was written hundreds of years ago. So while it may not have conventions where thousands of people go, Lord of the Rings will always be a literary classic, and it will always be part of our culture.
Yeah, and plus you have to read it in school in many cases, like in grade school. Whereas I don't think you're in grade 10, your English teacher is going to assign you Star Wars to read. But I could be mistaken.
Today we'll be
I was
reading the
never
novelization
told-
of Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover.
We never had to read Don Quixote in school, but that doesn't mean that we don't know the terms. I mean, come on. I mean, Quixotic has made its way even into Star Wars novels, and there is no place in Star Wars where Don Quixote exists.
Am I the only one on this podcast who's going to admit that he hasn't read Don Quixote?
I have not read Don Quixote either.
I watch a lot of The Expanse, so the Marciante is a Don Quixote reference. So yeah, Wikipedia is my friend. So,
but we all know what it is.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
true.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's like we don't know Taming of the Shrew, but we've seen it. We've probably seen a version of it. I mean, if you've seen 10 Things I Hate About You or any other derivative of Taming of the Shrew, we know what that is.
Yeah.
Well, Shakespeare's my homie, so I'm more familiar with the source text that time.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I am too, but I'm not most people.
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, what about the religious aspect of it? We already stated or talked briefly about the Lord of the Rings influencing the so-called hippie movement of the 60s and early 70s. It also influenced Wicca and pagans and neo-mystics and these types of beliefs. Whereas in Star Wars, we have Jediism, or the belief in the Jedi. So you have a case where you
Or the
have
belief in the Force.
in the Force, right? So you have this really odd social phenomenon where you have official government censuses, and people are putting the religion down as Jedi. That's amazing. I think, like in England, I think there's like almost 1% of the people consider themselves, their religion is Jedi. To me, that's amazing. Not only in a way that's kind of like protesting other religions, but it's pop culture because it makes sense. It's kind of like a watered down spiritual Buddhism going on there. I don't know. Randall, what do you think? I know you love the whole religious talk. Okay.
Yeah, well, when I think about that, I wonder. I was glad you hit the protest point, because when you think about people listing their religion as Jedi and people believing in the Force, I hope people aren't giving themselves aneurysms trying to lift rocks with their brains. But I expect that they're drawing some of the values out of a thing that they see as being familiar. And it's another way to express their fandom and their reverence for the literary source or the theatrical source of the thing that inspires them. And I think it's people grasping for a way to express their veneration of that thing. I think that, push comes to shove, do people think they're actually Jedi? No. Or do people want to redefine Jedi so much that they can belong to a thing that shows their kinship with the people in their fantasy lives who they respect and love? It's a really interesting question. What does it mean to say that you believe in X? But I mean, you can say that about established world religion too, right? Like, what does it mean rather to say that you believe in God? And you'll have a large number of people who purport to believe in God who don't act in ways that they would actually act if they actually believed God was watching them at any particular time. So the idea that, one is fake and the other is real, in terms of people's internal experience of the thing, that's something to which I just don't have access, but it raises really interesting questions.
But rather than using Jedi as a religion, you could go back to the Force as a religion, and the idea of this energy that kind of surrounds and binds and holds the galaxy together, kind of like duct tape. Duct tape can be a religion, depending on who you talk to. But that's kind of like Shintoism, where you have spirits in nature, and you have spirits that inhabit different edifices, different buildings and stuff, and that I find very fascinating.
Yeah, I just believe in
So,
No, that's cool.
Well, they discovered. Maybe
someone
they
tried
discovered
to
the.
Someone
Sorry, go
tried
ahead,
to
Carrie.
convince me once that the Force was an evil New Age religion, and that's when I kind of decided I was done with religion in general. So
They may have discovered the Force in the last few days, if you've been following the newspapers. That they've discovered a fifth fundamental force of nature, in addition to the weak nuclear force, strong nuclear force, gravity, and electromagnetism, the four classical forces. Now they think they may have discovered a fifth force. That the theory is that it links the observable world to dark matter. But I've decided it's probably midichlorians.
Yeah, this is actually a true story because it's out of a lab in Hungary, of all places, which I find quite interesting. So, science. Okay, what's the influence on these franchises on science, for instance? I know in science there's in anthropology and previous different strains of humans and Neanderthals. There's they found a species in I believe in Indonesia called Homo floresiensis. Yeah, I just butchered that badly, but they nickname it the Hobbits.
Nice.
But in science you have the same thing going on. They name things after Star Wars or after Lord of the Rings. In astronomy, when they found two suns orbiting an exoplanet, they say it's a Star Wars planet because there's two suns there. Yeah, you have holograms. So what came first, holograms and Star Wars, or holograms and other content out there? I don't know, but I think Star Wars really popularized holograms. All right.
Not to mention calling the nuclear defense program of the 80s the Star Wars program.
Oh yeah, the strategic defense.
The satellites that were supposed to shoot down nuclear missiles.
Yeah, I think that if I remember correctly, that kind of pissed off George a bit.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, so the Strategic Defense Initiative was done by Ronald Reagan, of course, during the Cold War. And some people credit that as a way of bankrupting the Soviet Union and causing the Soviet Union to collapse. Because they couldn't compete financially because their economy was a mess. Because of the failure of their financial system.
So you're saying Star Wars defeated communist Russia?
I don't think George Lucas would agree with that, but I don't want to speak for the man. So.
Well, communist Russia was considered the evil empire, so maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and if the internet has shown me anything, it's that both Lord of the Rings and Star Wars have brought us trolls.
Yeah, true.
This is true.
Definitely.
Reading the online comments to the most recent Star Wars movies, the online reviews, I think we have a lot of trolls who I'd like to see go out into the sunlight.
Yeah. And then there's the impact on education and students. I know one of the reasons I study history is because I had this fascination with the Lord of the Rings. So that I think it attracts students to the study of, say, the classics or to archaeology or to language and dead languages. Whereas Star Wars, well, I think it attracts a lot of students to film. I was partly one of them as well. But also maybe to science. But I think it's more of a storytelling franchise. What do you guys think?
Sounds fair. Yeah, I never thought about that before, but I guess the reason I liked history so much was because it was like Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Well, I know that sci-fi is traditionally credited with drawing a lot of people into the STEM disciplines, and that makes a heck of a lot of sense to me. I mean, I can see exactly why that would be. When I think about my own educational drive and what Lord of the Rings did for me, it just made me love literature. So driving me toward, my undergrad was a double major in science and English. So I can't differentiate the influence of one from the influence of the other.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the future of these franchises?
Long. Yes.
Well,
valuable.
We do have this Lord of the Rings series coming to Amazon, and season 2 just got renewed. Even before season 1 has been released on Amazon. So that takes place, I think, in the Second Age, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's going to be neat. So this is going to be
so
further.
Basically, they both have the future in streaming platforms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although hopefully Star Wars will continue to make movies despite all the problems they're having.
I just want another Spaceballs. Is that too much to ask for?
Hey, they at some point, Mel Brooks either has to make a sequel to one of the movies he's said he's going to make a sequel to, or just make a sequel to a movie he hasn't made just because it's funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to see The Search for More Money.
And just even activities. I'm thinking of like horse riding, equestrian, right? Lord of the Rings with the I can't pronounce. How do you pronounce the horse people? Rohinin?
Oh, the riders of Rohan.
Yeah, Rohan. Yeah. It's amazing. It makes me want to ride a horse every single day, right? Whereas the Lord of the Rings, I don't want to ride some other creatures out there. There's a few different creatures.
I'd hop on Shadowfax.
Yeah.
Shadowfax. I don't know, those Oliphants look like that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Unless you fell off of one.
What's the one from Mandalorian Chapter 1? The GURPS or the GURPIes? They're awesome.
Oh God, what do they call it? The blurgs.
Blurgs, that's it, blurgs.
Yeah.
How could I forget that? Yeah, the blurbs.
Which are apparently from the Ewok TV movies, and I just don't remember them.
Well.
They're like the smaller cousins to the Dewbacks, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What about food? I'm thinking about the foods that are drawn from each of the franchises. I mean, I know people sometimes get blue milk now, but
yes, although the blue milk at Disneyland needs rum.
You can smuggle it in, really. Yeah.
I know people who have gotten kicked out of Disneyland for bringing alcohol into the park. I am not going to be one of those people.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting breaking the law at all. No.
And I've seen lots of short, hairy people drinking beer. I think that was invented by Lord of the Rings.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Talking about religion, like Valhalla. I like that whole concept of Valhalla, but yeah, that predates Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Is there a common thread between the two franchises?
Oh, massive.
Like, go ahead.
Both of them draw influences. Not only does Star Wars draw lots of influence from Lord of the Rings directly, I mean, just your basic hero's journey, right? Both of the franchises are rooted firmly in that. They both equally draw influences from Shakespeare. They both equally draw influences from biblical sources. I mean, there are all these common literary threads feeding through both. I went on the web for 5 minutes and looked at biblical influences in Star Wars, biblical influences Lord of the Rings influences Star Wars. This is one family tree. It's not two completely distinct literary sources.
I like that description, a family tree. Cool.
Mm.
And they were both heavily drawn from the Ring saga, the German opera. What's
Wagner?
Wagner.
Yeah, Wagner. But that's based off of Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the next great classic franchise will come from? Literature or film?
Well, it's got to be Before Life.
Oh, yeah. Well, from literature, of course.
Drake.
No, it's gonna be mine.
Yeah, listen. When they make the movie, Randall, please, I do want a part in that. Okay, just saying. So, yeah, cast me. Write me a character I can play. Okay, I have to launch my acting career. It's been like 25 years since I took theater in high school.
Randall, I've been working on my series since 1993. How old is yours?
Oh, mine is a little bit younger. 2017.
Yeah, but it's kind of like I always ask, like, what's the next great thing it's going to come from? It's going to be a J.K. Rowling writing out of a coffee shop, while being very poor and being a single mom. Like, where's the next great story going to come from?
Yeah, it'll come out of nowhere. It'll be something that no one could have seen or predicted, but at the same time, it will also touch on the same kind of monomyth staples that we see in every popular story of good versus evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also have to look at it. It could be something as crazy as coming out of video games, right? Like that could be your next big cultural impact is, like Fortnite, only something with more of a literary or narrative arc to it. Looking at Star Wars and comparing it to Lord of the Rings, when one is largely text driven and the other one is largely film driven, the next thing might be, holography. We might have something akin to the holodeck being the next big thing.
That would be nice.
If you had to do a holodeck program and you had to choose Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, what would you choose?
Star Wars, because it's cleaner. There's just like dirt and mud everywhere in Lord of the Rings.
Well, sand gets everywhere apparently, and some people really hate that.
Ouch.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I would love to do a sparring program in either universe.
Yeah, I think
Gandalf or Yoda. Who's your favorite wizard?
Yoda.
Oh, that's tough. I think I'd have to go with Gandalf.
Yoda, hands down.
Mine's Old Kenobi. Old crazy Kenobi.
Wait till they get baby Gandalf.
When they inevitably remake the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, when he dies and comes back, he's gonna be a cute little baby.
Perfect.
Too much. All right. Any other comments or thoughts about this topic? Or insights?
Well, I am grateful to both of these franchises, so thank you to their various creators, and I'm so glad that these things exist, because if they didn't, we wouldn't have a podcast, and I wouldn't have an excuse to chat with you guys every month or so.
Thank you. That's amazing, yeah. Yeah, maybe podcasting is the next great thing. We can actually, change civilization by this podcast. I like to think. Could happen.
It's no
As long
weirder
as
than
we
Bill
get
and Ted fixing everything by being a
101
wild stallion.
Yeah, exactly. Most excellent.
That is true. And the third movie is coming out next year.
Maybe that'll be the next big thing. The Wild Stallions.
Oh God, yeah.
That could be interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Who's the Wild Stallions?
It's Bill and Ted's band.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a generational gap there. Okay.
I'm so sad. You know, I was this many years old the first time a student came up to me, it was earlier this week, and asked me about my retirement plans.
Oh dear.
Wait.
F minus.
You're a tenured professor. You don't retire. You're gonna die in your chair, man. Right?
We just fade away.
They come back as Force Ghosts. I got you. Okay. All right, let's wrap this show up, okay? So Discord, yes. Look for our social media channels for an invite on Discord. We are on Twitter at SciFi Pubcast. You can email us at management@scifipubcast.space. Right, Twitter is done by me, and Instagram is done by me, which is mostly restaurant-related stuff. Derek does the Facebook. Derek, good job with the Facebook page.
Roger.
Right. So where can people find us? Carrie, what's your Twitter address?
You can find me at Carrie Blackfire42. That's KERI Blackfire42.
And Derek, what's yours?
I am at Derek J. Beebe.
And Randal, author of Before Life. Drink. What's your Twitter address?
I'm at Randal_Graham.
Okay. I'm at Joel_Welch. If you want to do us a solid, please leave a review wherever you get this podcast from. It helps us grow our community because this bar is all about community. Please make it home safe. We're closing, at least for this episode. So take care. Bye, guys.
Off to the Great Havens.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
I have spoken.
Music provided courtesy of Logan Rathbone. Podcast logo by Jea Rhea. Copyrighted Joe Welch. Listen responsibly, and we can't wait for your next visit to our fine establishment. Cheers.